Thanks everyone, and welcome to our session about compliance benchmarks and how we migrated from the good old Jamf Compliance Editor to it. So as mentioned, I'm Martin, I work here at CIC. I grew up in Belgium originally, but I've been living in Melbourne for over 14 years now, and I'm a senior system engineer here looking after all the Apple devices.
Hey everyone, yep, as discussed, my name's Stu. I'm also based here in Melbourne, but I don't have such a delightful accent. I'm just accustomed to great coffee and unexpected weather. So, here's our agenda for today. We'll go through what is a security benchmark, level set a little bit on what that is, then we'll move into talking Jamf Compliance Editor, and then migrating to compliance benchmarks ultimately as well. So that's the three pieces.
Before we do that, let me first introduce you a bit about the context in which we work with. So for those of you that don't know, CIC, we are a global job marketplace platform that connects job seekers with employment opportunities to help employees find the right candidates. So we're working with about 1,500 Macs and 850 iOS devices, which makes up about 50% of our fleet. We have one single end-user compute platform for both Macs and Windows, which means every decisions we make, we try to consider both platforms equally. And we have a proper choose-your-own-device program, which is why the parity is about 50%.
Nice. All right, so let's dig into the topic itself. Firstly, Martin, what is a security benchmark?
So a security benchmark, it's a standard set of guidelines, best practices and configuration recommendations that are designed to help organizations improve their security posture. It can be used as a reference point to assess and align your systems, your policies, your processes to industry recognized standards. There's a whole range of them to cover all the different OSs, and each of those OSs will have different levels of security as well.
So to give you a bit of an idea here, so the macOS Security Compliance Project is importantly an open source effort to provide a programmatic approach to generating security guidance, which I know is a mouthful, but the project can be used critically to output customized documentation, scripts, both for logging and remediation, configuration profiles, and an audit checklist based on the baseline that you've used and customized. So you can see the range of baselines here, NIST and CIS included.
So, in September last year, our security department asked us to enforce a security benchmark. We agreed with them that the CIS Level 1 was probably the most appropriate for us, knowing that it would require some tweaking. As Sequoia was about to come out, and benchmarks are reviewed every time a new OS is released, we asked them if we could wait for macOS 15 to be released, and they were happy with that. Compliance benchmarks had just been announced at JNUC, but we didn't quite have a release date or a timeline for it, so we decided to proceed without it.
So this is where, typically in the past, Jamf Compliance Editor came into action. So there is a lot of documentation out there and also a lot of talks from previous events. So we won't go into too much detail on it, but we will give you a bit of an overview. So Jamf Compliance Editor is an app that will help you build and customize your security baseline for your organization. It supports all the versions of macOS and the variety of benchmarks that I mentioned a second ago. It's got a very simple UI and will generate guidance in PDF format, I know Nick loves those, that can be shared with the rest of the business. Right, so Martin, that's all fine. Let's talk about implementation.
Well, in the span of 6 weeks, we went from 0 to 100. First, we reviewed the baseline, and we agreed on some of the variants with security. For example, like allowing AirDrop and not having the Bluetooth icon always have to be in the menu bar. And then using the Jamf Compliance Editor, we created that benchmark and customized the baseline. We then tested it first in our dev environment, then rolled it into our pilot group, and eventually to production. The experience was pretty smooth, as I said, 6 weeks total. I think that's a pretty decent timeline, and it was virtually invisible to users because we tweaked it enough. Like, even though we didn't have an official baseline before, we were already doing most of the good practices. So rolling it to formally stick with CIS Level 1 was pretty much seamless. We created heaps of configuration profiles, policies, extension attributes, and some smart groups for automated remediation. Now, during this process, having good documentation is quite critical because those benchmarks are actually hundreds of pages and it can take a while to get your head around it. So what we did is clearly listed every rule and classified them in 3 categories: enforce, tweak, or exclude. And this made our life a lot easier later when it came time to migrate to compliance benchmarks.
So, Martin, I think it's fair to say you're a pretty big fan of Splunk. If I'm not mistaken, you've spoken in the room here at XWorld previously about Splunk.
I have, and I definitely am. Seek is a pretty big Splunk client, which is great because it means all of our logs, including the Jamf logs, are already going into it. So from those logs, it was reasonably easy to create some reporting dashboards to track our progress and mostly to brag to our colleagues and the rest of the workforce how good we are at our jobs. For example, if we look here at the compliance trend, like as soon as we turned it on, it went straight up and it showed us that the system was actually working. And then if we were to ever see like a massive drop in there, we'd say, oh, something is wrong. It's probably time to investigate. So it could be a false negative, but still definitely worth checking out to see what's going on.
So, enter compliance benchmarks, a new feature that was announced at JNUC last year that is basically bringing the Jamf Compliance Editor's functionality into Jamf Pro itself. So, let's find out some more. Now, forgive me if you've heard this a little bit lately from other Jamfs. Jamf Account SSO allows you to use a cloud identity provider or Jamf ID configured in Jamf Account to log in to Jamf Pro. This process is relatively simple and necessary to hook up your Jamf Pro environment to our platform services, which critically in this case drives compliance benchmarks. So, important step that's required there. So right now, within compliance benchmarks, 2 templates are available, CIS Level 1 and 2, more to come soon. An advantage of platform services, the release cycle is not tied to the Jamf Pro release schedule. So, I'll let that sink in for a second because I think that's critical. So if I'm using Jamf Pro, I'm probably keeping an eye on the Jamf Pro release notes and also the Jamf Pro Blueprints release notes and the Jamf Pro Compliance Benchmarks release notes. So, pro tip on this front, if you log into the Jamf Learning Hub with your Jamf ID or identity, however, and subscribe, you can subscribe to these release notes, those 3 that I mentioned there, and then you'll get updates when there's changes to those documents rather than it being how you start your day like me. So, that's my pro tip. But Martin, do you mind just walking us through the process, assuming we've done all this stuff?
Of course. So let's go and select CIS Level 1. And for now, you see that there's a nice little assistant there that's going to take you through it. We're just going to pick monitoring only because we want to make sure first that we align all our policies to avoid any conflicts before we go into enforcing mode. So going through the assistant there, you'll see that the rule selection is actually mirroring the CIS benchmark. So it's very easy to find them. This is when you can refer to that existing documentation I mentioned just before and make sure that everything matches. So for example, if you need to remove that rule about the Bluetooth icon being in the menu bar, you can easily search for it by either 2.4, which is the reference from the CIS benchmark, or you could just type Bluetooth, whichever works for you. Some rules also allow for customization. So once again, make sure that you refer to your documentation and your existing policies if you're migrating so that we can match the compliance benchmarks to whatever you have. So like for example, if the CIS benchmark says that your lock screen should be at 15 minutes maximum, but then your organization says, actually, we would like that to be 5, let's just make sure that you go customize that to 5 so that it matches what your personal benchmark is all about. And before you save, once you're at the end of the assistant there, it will display everything it's going to create. Now, just a reminder that because we're in monitoring only mode, no config profiles are going to be created. We're just creating a few policies, so everything we're doing here is not going to have any impact to your fleet right now. We're just in reporting mode. And so here we go. It's live. You've pressed the deploy button, and to be fair, it was pretty straightforward. This really took about 15 minutes to get here. But Stu, let's say we want to get back in and click on that open button.
Sure. So if we would click into that, what we'll see within the UI there is a summary of the baseline they've created. Now, it looks about as simple as I suppose the process was quick. You'll see critically 2 tabs up the front, configuration and report. Let's jump into report so we can look at some individual rules. So here's the rule report, my individual benchmark rules. Now, unfortunately, because the CIS benchmark doesn't utilize declarative yet, neither does the reporting. So if you were using Blueprint, it may trigger some false positives around maybe software updates and password policies that we'll talk about in a second. So that's why you'll see some fails on this screenshot.
All right, but if we head over to policies, this is what was created. And you see that the whole new set of auditing policies were created under that CIS Level 1 categories that was created automatically by compliance benchmarks. And because we have very similar naming convention, you see that just on top of that, these are old ones from the Jamf Compliance Editor that we created ourselves. Now, because here at SIG, we pretty good at our job and the whole fleet is on Sequoia, you'll see that we actually don't need to split each OSs there in our rules. That is, of course, until Tahoe comes out in a few weeks. If we go back into the reporting tab, we can start maybe trying to investigate some failure, because again, the whole point here is to align our policies so that everything matches and we can turn the enforcing as planned. So if we go here and look at this failing policy there for the login message, you can see that some fine-tuning is required. And you know, it's pretty straightforward. It's because when clicking through the assistant, I forgot to edit this rule. So it's still the default CIS message instead of our custom one. So all you need to go there is edit it, match it with your policy and whatever was agreed with security. And then once you save as draft, you'll see that it will once again clearly display that, yeah, there's a change there that needs to be deployed, which you can discard if you want to, but in our case, we of course want to deploy it. So let's go and hit that deploy button, and a few minutes after, everything has turned green and we're all happy. So that specific failure has now been fixed and we can move on.
Job done.
Job done.
So, Martin, is there perhaps some other way to monitor the compliance of the devices?
Well, I'm glad you asked you, because yes, there is. And that's by looking at the extension attributes. So here you can see that, once again, we've got, because we're in that migration process, we've got our new ones and our old one that are next to each other. So the new one created by the compliance benchmarks is sitting there on top. And as you can see, we do have some failures even in our old one. And that's because we did move to declarative management for things like software updates. So in this case, because the CIS benchmark doesn't cover that, we have some false negative. Now, to sort this one out, there's actually a very easy way, which is go and turn back your old configuration profiles back on. And then, because declarative will actually supersede them, there's not going to be any issues. But in terms of your reporting, you can keep everyone happy. So we've gone ahead and done that. But you see that we still have some extension attributes there, like some reporting on some rules that are still failing. And that's because when going through that assistant, I completely forgot about Apple Intelligence, because to give you a bit of background there, that was part of a different project, so the documentation was in a separate section. So anyway, forgot about it, no drama. I went back through the assistant and turned all these on. But even after I did that, the extension attribute actually didn't update and stayed as it is here. And let's dig a bit deeper into that. If you actually want to know how this works, the auditing policy that is created by either the Jamf Compliance Editor or Compliance Benchmark is a policy that will run and populate a plist on the computer. And basically, it will populate each one of the rules that you've selected with either a false, a positive or a negative flag to see if the rule was passed or not. So first thing first, when you are setting this up for the first time, you need to go and flush that policy manually, because it is only scheduled to run once a day originally. So if you are playing with this and making lots of tweaks and you're working in your dev environment and whatever, you want to go and flush it to refresh all those extension attributes. But in this case, because I actually removed those rules completely from the benchmark, while the plist wasn't getting those flags weren't getting updated anymore, because the rules were removed from the benchmarks, the auditing policy was not going to remove them. It would just only update false or true, but in this case, I needed to get rid of them completely. So the key here is that you want to go and delete the plist, run the auditing policy again so that it recreates the plist without those those rules that you just got rid of, and now eventually everything is going to get fixed and look as good as it should before you go any further.
This is why we test, some would say.
100%, 100%. And then once you've done that, of course, if your extension attributes are clean, so will be your reporting, and everything there is green, and everything's well. Amazing.
Nice.
Now, while we're in here, if you want to go and click on any of these rules, you can, and it will actually dig a bit deeper and show you each individual machines that you've got in there. So that allows you to do some investigating if you need to figure out why one device is failing and not the others. Well, here you can really drill down and say, okay, I need to have a deeper look into this specific machine.
So, Martin, now that we've been doing our monitoring and we've made sure our sort of policies are aligned, benchmarks are aligned with our policies internally, is it time to go ahead and turn on enforcement? Flick the big switch?
Yeah, I reckon it is. Let's go for it.
Nice.
And so if you do, it's going to be once again pretty straightforward. Now, as expected, compliant benchmarks is going to create a whole new bunch of policies and heaps of configuration profiles. If we go and have a look, all these configuration profiles are indeed there. They've been created automatically under that new category. It's all nice and tidy. And if you actually click on any of them, you'll see that, these are custom P lists where you can go and inspect the XML to actually see what each and individual profiles does. If you move over to, you might still need some additional configuration profile on top of the one that I automatically created. Like, for example, if you need one to allow beta installations, or if you need one to let non-admin run software updates. So keep that in mind. The benchmark is great, and it will make you compliant, but it doesn't mean that it's going to do everything for you. You might still need to complement that with a couple of things on top. If we head back into our policies, you'll see that some new ones have been created. So now on top of the audit one, we do have the remediation one. So for each OS, we got two policies, one which is the audit, one is the remediation. And all that again was created automatically for you. So the workload is actually quite low, to be honest. If you do dig into those remediation policy, you will see that they basically run a script. And that script has got a few flags there, which is a check and a fix. Now, we don't really have time to dig into this too deep, but if you are familiar with the Jamf Compliance Editor, this is the very same logic. If you're not familiar, please go and have a look at either the sessions or the documentation. It is quite well documented out there.
Cool. So, Martin, is that it? Like, job done, brush off our hands, we never need to look at this again?
Well, not quite, unfortunately, because from here onwards, you do need to monitor for any updates in the benchmark. Now, the beauty of this whole system and the max security compliance is that it's all very programmatic, which means updates can become available as new releases of the OS come out, or if the CIS or any of those organizations decide that maybe some settings needs to be changed. But once again, compliance benchmarks makes it pretty straightforward and easy. So if you go and have a look and see, okay, there's clearly there a flag to say that an update is available. So you can dig in, go and have a look. And if you can't see it, like, there it is, update available. It's pretty clear. And you click through and you look for the flags. And in this case, okay, there was a new rule that was added. And then it's just up to you if you want to enforce it or not. And that's just a button that you can click. Once you've decided what you want to do about it, and then once again you go through, you deploy, and you're done.
I think I can handle that.
I think you should be able to. Yeah, it's quite nice. It's quite impressively well done, to be honest.
So, this all does seem pretty straightforward and awesome, but we do always think of the few things that you should be mindful of and be aware of if you go down this path. Now, be careful, as always, with your file vault profile. So the configuration there is something we should all be worried about ruining our month by messing with. So, as always, do not mess with unless you want to reissue those, do not invalidate your recovery keys. Now, another word of warning as well, anything created by compliance benchmarks is editable in Jamf Pro, but you should not do this So any manual changes you make to a config profile, policy, or smart group that has been created by compliance benchmarks will be overwritten next time you deploy a change through compliance benchmarks. So don't futz with it, enjoy the automation.
100%. Now this is all great, but it's not perfect yet. There's definitely a few things I wish was available there. And just keep in mind that this is today, the 3rd of September. Things are going to change, but right now, there's a few things that I wish we could have. The first one, I guess, is declarative support. Now, again, it's not really a Jamf fault or even a CIS, well, I guess, it's just not currently part of the benchmark. So hopefully that's going to come soon, but right now it's definitely a bit of a gap there in the system. Release notes. Now, Stu mentioned that there's some release notes and you can subscribe to them in the Learning Hub, which is good, but to be fair, I wish there were more. Like, I've been monitoring those pages for the last few months, and there's been a handful of updates and polls, but like, I'm a big believer of more information and more notes is better, so...
I've never heard anyone say too much documentation.
That's probably fair. So yeah, more would be good. There are 3 things that are available in the Jamf Compliance Editor that is not yet available in compliance benchmarks. First one, obviously, more templates. CIS Level 1 and 2 is great, and it's pretty common, especially for us here in Australia, I guess, but having more templates would be amazing. Having an exemption process would be good too, because the compliance editor will basically create a config profile that you can go and edit and turn some flags on and off and write a justification there why specific devices might be excluded from certain rules. So that would be quite nice to have something similar with compliance benchmarks. And the PDF exports. Stu mentioned the PDF exports. Right now it does not exist with compliance benchmarks. So I guess if you really need it, you might need to, dig into both solutions there. But otherwise, hopefully, soon enough, who knows, we'll have that PDF export. Now the last thing I'm going to mention is a tricky one. It's a report or an alert for devices that are dropping in and out of compliance. Now, let me give you an example first. For example, so SSH. SSH, the CIS benchmarks does want it to be disabled, but you can't do that through a config profile. So the remediation script will basically go and run a command to turn off SSH on every computer. But if some of your users have got local admin rights, they could just go and turn it back on using the terminal. And so you want to monitor for those that are basically actively fighting back against the benchmarks, because that remediation policy is only scheduled to run once a day. They could literally 5 minutes later run the command to turn SSH back on, and then you'd be basically going in and out of compliance every day.
Cat and mouse.
Now, yeah, you can do this with smart groups and email or webhooks monitoring, but I've personally made an alert in Splunk where there's like a threshold, like if the computer comes in and out of compliance more than twice in the last week, that's when I want to get an alert. Because, for example, when we build our computer, we only apply the CIS benchmark at the end of the build, so we already know that the computer is going to start not being compliant, then go into compliance. So there's always going to be a bit of back and forth, especially in the early days of the build. But what we want to monitor is for users actively fighting back, because they might just need a bit of a chat, say, hey mate, I see what you're doing there, but could you please stop?
So polite. So the aim, I suppose, that we were originally talking about is kind of answering this question. So Martin, what is your verdict? Should folks in the audience migrate or not?
Yeah, I want to say yes, 100% yes.
Thank goodness.
If you didn't pick it up from this presentation, it is surprisingly easy. It is also much easier to maintain and collaborate, because now everyone has got access to the same UI and the same rules. Like, you don't have to share a compliance editor file across a team or things like that. So I find it a lot easier for sure. And hopefully it's going to make adoption of new OSs a lot easier as well. Like, we know there's one coming up soon, and it should hopefully make everything a lot smoother. I'd even go one step further. Like, if some of you out here have never looked into compliance benchmarks or security benchmarks of any sorts, like, you can skip compliance editor completely and just start straight here with compliance benchmarks, because it's as easy as it gets, I guess.
Yep. And just to drive that point home, that one thing between you and being able to use compliance benchmarks, Jamf account SSO. So I'm going to drive that home again. Your Cloud IDP hooked into Jamf account SSO is the link that hooks this platform service that we provide into your Jamf Pro environment. So hopefully everyone remembers that point.
Here we go. Thanks everyone for attending. Here are some details to some of the existing documentations and our contact details if you want to reach out.